We both went to Northwestern for undergrad. Actually, my head's not in there. We both, well, he went to medical school at Loyola. I work at Loyola. We're both really, really smart. Yeah, everyone here is laughing. You guys online can't hear that. But everyone started laughing. Actually, a couple people even fell out of their seats. Okay, that's where the similarities end. He is really, really smart. And I've said this to everyone I've ever met that I've talked to about him. He is by far the smartest person, not the smartest doctor, but the smartest person that I know. You know, you hear the expression, jack of all trades, master of none. Well, he is the jack of all trades, master of all. Because everything he does very, very well, and usually better than anybody else. He actually trained and worked with Dr. Zollinger at the Ohio State University. So when I worked in his lab and we talked and did research on gastronoma, I mean, nobody knew that better than somebody that worked with Zollinger, right? We had this was before computers were really around when I worked in his lab. So there wasn't a good statistics program. Well, he wrote the statistics program that we used for all the research that I did, which, I mean, who does that, right? And especially a surgeon or a doctor doing that. Pretty amazing. He was a phenomenal clinician, an amazing surgeon. Over time became somewhat bored with that and needed a new challenge. So then he actually got a PhD in industrial and systems management engineering. When one of the courses was too hard for the actual professor to teach, and other students complained about it, he taught himself enough so that he actually taught the course to the remainder of the students, and then became a full professor in that department, and then actually took it and applied what he learned in industrial and systems management to medicine and to surgery, and helped better the university and really a lot of what we do in surgery through that. So I could go on and talk about him, but I'm going to let him talk some more. I am honored that he has agreed to come up here. He started out as my boss. He became my mentor. And now I've known him for over 30 years. And he is truly one of my closest friends. Vivian, who was my chief resident and is now my boss in Tampa, Dr. Gatan, actually laughed when I called him Dr. Fabri. I've known him for over 30 years. I still call him Dr. Fabri. But I present to you Dr. Peter Jeff Fabri, the annual Harridge Lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Goudelis, for your overly generous introduction. In Italian, we would say, il piacere è mio, which means it's my pleasure to be here and to honor you on the presidency of the Midwest Surgical Association. But first of all, before I launch into this, I would like to thank all of you who are not here for not being here today. I entitled this from the very beginning when I started to think about it as Find Your Joy. But I soon realized that I needed to give it a subtitle. The subtitle is probably more meaningful to you at this moment. The surgeon can never retire. But as you can see in my name, there's no letters after it. It just says retired. I don't know if you believe in serendipity. This is this summer's edition of the magazine in the mountains of North Carolina, where I live most of the year. And as you can see, it says, as its title, Find Your Joy. And so I had to share this with you because it's very relevant to what I'm going to talk about today. I need to tell you in advance, this is not going to be your typical invited lecture talking about typical surgical things. This is a story, not a lecture. There's a moral to the story, and there's a happy ending. But I would not be an academic surgeon if I did not start with a review of the literature. I did a search in Medline for the word surgeon and retirement. I came up with 32 articles. This was not intended to be a comprehensive search, just to give us a sense of what's out there. Most of the 32 articles, about 18, were about financial planning. The remainder of them addressed how to assess if you still have your surgical skills and can practice safely, ways for people when they retire to stay connected to their departments and to surgery. The best of those, I believe, was actually Kirby Bland. If you want to read an interesting article, Kirby Bland wrote an article about the time he was retiring, about how to stay connected with the department without getting in the way. And then there's a few out there about malpractice tail coverage and what do you do about that. There was not one article in the medical literature about what do you do when you're retired. I have to give you an outline because it's a story. There is an introduction and background and events. There is a statement of the outcome. There's a story. There's a moral of the story. And then there's a conclusion and recommendations. The background and events, April 10th, 2005, I was at the top of my game. I was doing all of those things that Dr. Gedelis just was kind enough to tell you about, and more. I was practicing surgery full time. I was the designated institutional official at my institution with 750 residents and fellows and 82 programs. I ran a hospital. I did it all. At 6:45, precisely, on April 11th, 2005, I had a massive MI. I learned firsthand what it feels like to have an elephant stand on your chest. And the only good news is that I was less than a half a mile away from Tampa General Hospital, the major quaternary hospital on the west coast of Florida. And so I'm here today. So the outcome is very straightforward. I fully retired from all of my professional activities on December 1st, 2014. Now, for those of you who only want the Clip Notes version, you are excused. Because now I'm going to tell my story. My wife said to me at that meeting, I want you to start trying on hobbies. You have to seriously try, but you don't have to continue all of them. When you retire, I want you to be able to fill 7 days a week. I don't want you following me around the kitchen. So what do I do? Well, those of you who are from Chicago will recognize this figure, Louis Sullivan from Sullivan and Adler Architects. Those of you who have taken the Chicago River Architectural Boat Tour have seen a large percentage of his works. He's responsible for almost all of the architecture in downtown Chicago. But what he's really known for is his statement, form ever follows function. You've probably heard it a number of ways. I looked it up. This is actually how he wrote it in an architectural journal. Form ever follows function. That means in order for me to know what my retirement was going to look like, I had to figure out what it was supposed to do. Or more importantly, what was I supposed to do? I looked at my list of existing hobbies. I had done a lot of sailing. I won't bore you with my dossier, but I actually sailed in a small boat across the Atlantic. I liked listening to Bach organ music. When I retired from the University of South Florida, they wrote a very, very nice article about me, and they concluded that I would spend more time sailing and more time listening to Bach. I had done some very, very simple prior woodworking, throwing things through a little benchtop table saw. And my wife and I had taken prior lessons in ballroom dancing. That's the inventory in June of 2005. I have to say a word about financial planning, but with the note that this is not included in the story except to mention it. It turns out I was in very good shape, much better shape than I probably could have done if I'd planned it. But it wasn't actually because I planned it. I hadn't really ever thought about retiring. I never thought about my retirement. I just got lucky. And if you don't get any other message from this presentation today, regardless of what your age is, sit down and plan what your retirement is. Even if it's to say, I'm not going to retire, do it consciously and not passively. So I immediately embarked on some new adventures. I enrolled in a PhD program shortly after my heart attack. It's important to note that I had never taken a single course in engineering. By some flukes and quirks that I still don't understand, I met the entrance requirements for a PhD program in engineering. But the reality is I'd never taken any of those courses. And so it meant that when I started the PhD program, I had to teach myself an undergraduate curriculum in engineering just to be able to take my courses. I did a 40-hour apprenticeship in the Publix butcher shop. You're all familiar with Publix. If not, it's a very, very large chain like Kroger's. And you're going to say, how did I do that? Well, the answer is very simple, and I think it's very relevant to this presentation. I asked. I went to the manager of the butcher department, and I said, I'm a retired surgeon. I'm a retiring surgeon. I've operated with my hands all my life. I have good hand and eye skill. Would it be possible for me to spend time behind the counter with the butchers and learn how to cut meat? He said, well, it's fine with me, but I have to ask the store manager. Store manager said, I have to ask the district manager. The district manager said, I have to ask the regional manager. The regional manager says, I have to ask corporate. And they all said yes. So the message there is, ask. And you're going to be surprised. Maybe not everybody's going to let you do everything you ask for, but a lot of them will. I did a 100-hour apprenticeship in clock repair. I have assembled and disassembled completely about 20 grandfather clocks. The mechanism, not the box. I did a 40-hour apprenticeship in hand woodworking at the Thomas Moser cabinet maker in Auburn, Maine. I took out subscriptions to woodworking magazines, cooking magazines, and a lot of others. And probably one of the more helpful things that I did is I bought a tablet and a Fire Stick, which made it really, really easy for me to start looking things up. Here I am at my graduation, and I just want to point out that the hood is not green. You all recall our hoods Had green on the front. This one is orange. There were three unique aspects to my PhD. The first is I was the only graduate student in the entire university with tenure. The second, and probably most important to our conversation today, is that I went immediately on sabbatical upon graduation. When I returned from sabbatical, I was appointed as a full professor of engineering and given a series of courses to teach in engineering. My sabbatical in the fall of 2007 was at Northwestern University. I conducted a needs assessment for a curriculum in health systems engineering. And the reason that I chose Northwestern is that the two campuses were geographically separate. Engineering was up in Evanston, medicine was downtown. But more importantly, the headquarters of all the major medical organizations, the Joint Commission, the AMA, the American College of Surgeons, go on and on and on. They're all in Chicago. And so it made it really easy for me to interview all these people and gather information to determine what would a doctor need to actually understand how to use data. And from that, I created a curriculum of 4 master's level courses in human error and patient safety, optimization, health systems analytics, and Lean Six Sigma quality improvement. After my sabbatical, I created and taught 4 different types of true engineering courses, had nothing to do with healthcare, pure engineering. I also created the curriculum for both a certificate and master's program at my university in the College of Engineering and Health Systems Engineering. Took it all the way to approval. I continued as the DIO for GME for another 5 years. But I trained an endocrine surgeon to take my place, and I trained an intensivist to take over my intensive care unit. One of the most fun parts is I created and taught a curriculum for medical students who signed up for a 4-year program, 1 course a year in health systems engineering while they were in medical school. And when they got their MD, they also received a certificate in health systems engineering. And I wrote a book. Here's my book. It's all math. It's all computers, but I wrote it, and I haven't heard that it didn't work. I've written it so that a reasonably interested surgeon can read and understand the book and apply it to what he does. Okay, folks. Enough of the story. It's showtime. That is, what am I doing in my retirement? You're all familiar with Yogi Berra. He's one of my heroes. And the longer I lived, the more I realized that he wasn't just making mistakes in talking. He was actually saying some really profound things. And this is one of them. He said, when you reach a fork in the road, take it. Why is that profound? Because in real life, the forks don't have signs. They don't have directions. You could easily go by a fork in the road and totally miss it if you're not prepared to look for it. The key is you have to be prepared. So one day I suddenly realized that what was really giving me joy in woodworking and most everything else is solving problems. I was hand planing the top for a side table for my son's living room, and I suddenly realized that it wasn't the actual woodworking that gave me joy. It was the planning. But then I thought some more, and I recognized that it wasn't actually planning either. It was actually anticipating the problems, how to avoid the problems, and how to deal with the problems when they occur. And that's when the light went on. That's surgery. I had found the directions for my retirement. That led to a major life change. I bought a cabin in North Carolina mountains in rural Appalachia, and I built a hand wood shop under the house. I took over all the cooking responsibilities in our house. I stopped using the title doctor. Yes, I really did. I worked at getting to know people, not just doctors, people, all kinds of people, really, really interesting people. And I offered to help them with things when they broke. I became the utility man to fix things for people. And I volunteered. I volunteered for all kinds of things. I put my license in retired status. I told people who asked that I don't have a medical license in North Carolina. I can't provide you any medical care or actual advice, but what I can do is explain things to you. I can interpret things from your doctors. And if anything at all can't be explained by the tests and reports that have already been done, I'm going to send you back to your doctor because I can't diagnose or treat. My wife calls it my friends and family private practice. Here are some pictures from my town. In the upper left, that is actually the view from town. That's my cabin on the right. Perfectly fine for my wife and myself, and it has enough room for some visitors to stay if they don't stay too long. The bottom left is my wife and I standing on top of our ski resort, which is 6 minutes from my house. Actually, quite challenging. And in the lower right is the Elk River, a very short drive from my house. If you look next to the tree up at the top of that waterfall, you see me. This is a river where I frequently fly fish. I told you that I was a sailor and that they said that I was going to spend a lot of time sailing. I show you this slide to remind me to tell you that I sold my boat. I haven't looked back. I haven't even thought about sailing. Even as I came across the ferry yesterday, I said it was pretty. I saw a sailboat. It's over. I got very involved in my church, and I'm not going to go into any specifics about that. For those of you who recognize the garb, that's me as the oldest altar boy in North Carolina. The upper right picture is actually the original Catholic church in our county. That was the whole church. Bottom left is a picture, a painting done by a very, very well-known artist very, very recently of St. Bernadette, which is the name of our church. The pastor actually asked me to come up with a secure way to hang this very dear and treasured painting in the church wall. And on the bottom right is a picture that is in our church, and I was given actually by a friend this painting as well. It's by a fellow named Toby Rosenthal from 1916, and it provides me inspiration on a regular basis. So if you look at the two pictures on the left, these are of statues, hands of statues. Our pastor is very, very fond of vintage statues. And as you can see, both of the left side pictures are missing fingers. And so I actually carved those fingers, worked out the arrangements of the orientation, how they ought to point, which way the joints should go. And on the right, you see the reimplanted fingers. And so I didn't entirely give up surgery. Upper left, you see my vintage metal planes. Almost all of those were bought at flea markets and antique shops. And that means I had to learn how to restore those planes. Upper right are some of my wood vintage planes and tools, and I had to learn how to repair those. The bottom left is actually a plane that I made from scratch completely, called a Philister rabbiting plane. And on the bottom right are some of my chisels to remind you that I also had to learn how to create what is called in the trade scary sharp tools. Here are a few of the pieces of furniture that I've made, all of them because I wanted to learn how to make a specific joint. And I'll only mention the upper left one. There was a very famous woodworker by the name of Sam Maloof, and he made a rocking chair and created this joint that you see here, but I could find no evidence that it had ever been used on something like this stool. And so I had to figure out how to do the Maloof joint by hand. He used machines, and how to make it strong enough that you could stand on this stool. All of these pictures are joints that I made myself learn how to do by hand so that I could make these pieces, all of which my wife said to me, could you make? And here are a few other pieces, each of them requiring a new set of techniques. I also took up cooking. I started out, because of my heritage, learning how to cook Tuscan food. You probably don't know this, but there are actually 10 provinces in Tuscany, and each of the 10 provinces has its own cuisine. And that meant I had to learn 10 different kinds of Tuscan cooking. And when I felt that I had been pretty accomplished in that, I decided to take on Venetian cooking as well. What Dr. Gedelis did not say is that I liked Bach so much that I decided I was going to learn how to play the pipe organ. And yes, in fact, I can play this pipe organ, and I can play Baroque classical music on this pipe organ, including pedals. And the way I did that is one day after church, I went to the organist and I asked her if she would be willing to teach a 70-year-old man who could not read a note of music how to play the organ. And she was so blown away, she said yes. The moral of the story: in order to be able to walk away from surgery, you have to understand what gives you joy on an average day at the hospital. Not the great days, not when you pulled off that operation that nobody else could do. On an average day, what gives you joy to get you to go back to work every day? What do surgeons do? Well, most of us solve problems. And so I think a lot of you will be a lot like me. That's my joy. I don't know for sure what yours is, but when you find it and find ways to achieve it every day, then you can walk away. I turn wood into things. What's your superpower? So the rules: find your joy, and it's not golf. I don't have anything against golf, but golf is a pastime. It's what you escape work to do, and that's not going to carry you through retirement. And that's why when you talk to people who say they're going to play more golf, most of them aren't very happy in retirement, because that's not going to replace the joy that kept you going for 40 years. Plan one thing for tomorrow. Now, most of us feel that there's something wrong if we don't have every minute of tomorrow already prearranged so that we're going to run out of time and work till 8 o'clock at night. It's in our genes. But you don't have to do that. You only have to plan one thing, and you will fill the rest of the day with things that you enjoy doing. And don't plan the day after tomorrow if you don't have to. Plan one thing for tomorrow. I believe this is key. At least it was key for me. You have to read. You have to learn. You have to prepare for what's next. I gave up sailing. I don't do nearly as much fly fishing. There's a number of other things that I don't do that I thought I was going to do. I tried them. And I decided not for right now. And then you have to prepare for what's after next, not just what's going to be in 3 months or 6 months. You need to start to prepare for what's after next. What are you going to be doing in 2 years, and 3 years, and 5 years? And start reading about it. Start learning about it. If it requires a new skill, start training for that skill. You've been reading to keep up for a long time. Now it's time to start reading for your future. So I have a couple of recommendations, and then I'm done. Yes, a surgeon can find a fulfilling life after surgery. Regardless of age, understand and plan your finances now. Identify what fundamental action gives you joy every average day, and start trying out hobbies that will lead you to that joy. Being a surgeon was the greatest accomplishment of my first life. But there are many more accomplishments, many more problems to solve, many more friends. I never learned anything in my life that didn't eventually turn out to have a use. Nothing. So I just keep learning. Life is an open book. Read it. Here are some pictures we actually convinced a young woman graphic designer to make that show the Four Seasons on Beach Mountain. I wanted to show you the real Four Seasons on Beach Mountain. The top left is my wife and me planting potatoes behind a 50-year-old John Deere tractor. The upper right is summertime, as seen from the top of our mountain with the clouds down below us. The bottom left is the absolutely incredible colors of fall. And yes, that's our back deck in the bottom right. But wait, you're asking yourself, how hard did I have to work to get where I am now? I mean, how can I give that up? And of course, you can continue as a surgeon. Most of us do. I'm not trying to tell you to retire. I just want you to see that it's possible. Or when you are financially secure and your kids are out of the nest, you can actually start over. You can make new contributions and face new challenges and find out that they're really a whole lot of fun because you actually have a choice. And instead of having a slide that says the end, I'm going to end with a slide that says the beginning, with an epilogue. And this is from The Lord of the Rings. It is not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule. Thank you for your attention.